I remember the exact moment my heart shattered into a million pieces, not by a stranger, but by the very child I raised with every ounce of my being, aided by the woman he chose to marry. But what they didn't know was that a broken heart can sometimes forge a will of iron, and what they intended as my end was only the beginning of their reckoning. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. My life, for as long as I could remember, had been about quiet devotion and hard work. I was Maria, a name that means bitter sea, and perhaps it was a premonition of the storms I would weather. I worked tirelessly as a nurse for over 40 years, starting on the night shift, often picking up double shifts just to make ends meet after my husband, God rest his soul, passed away too soon. My son, David, was my world, my only child. Every extra hour, every penny saved, every sacrifice was for him. I wanted him to have a life free from the struggles I knew. I made sure he went to the best schools, had opportunities I never did, and when he met Sarah, a charming, albeit ambitious young woman, I welcomed her into our small family with open arms and an even more open heart. Their dream, which soon became my dream too, was to buy a house. Not just any house, but a beautiful, spacious home with a garden, where my future grandchildren could play. They had some savings, but it was modest. I, on the other hand, had accumulated a substantial nest egg from decades of careful saving and a small inheritance from my parents. Without a moment's hesitation, I offered it all. Every cent of my retirement fund, the down payment, and a significant portion for renovations all went into that house. The understanding was clear. It would be our family home. My name was on the initial deed as a co-owner, and while David and Sarah handled the mortgage payments, the bulk of the upfront cost and the emotional investment was mine. I moved in with them, a cozy arrangement where I could help with the house, tend the garden, and eventually look after my precious grandchildren, Leo and Chloe. For years, it was idyllic. I cooked, I cleaned, I volunteered for school runs, I read bedtime stories, and I poured all my love into them. The house, Vakbing's house, felt like the culmination of a life well lived, a testament to family, a sanctuary. Then came the day the sanctuary turned into a cage. It was a Tuesday evening, just after I'd tucked Leo and Chloe into bed, their sweet faces still flushed from a day of play. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters, humming a quiet tune. David and Sarah called me into the living room, their faces unusually grim. My first thought was that something terrible had happened to the children, or to their jobs. My heart pounded. David sat on the edge of the sofa, Sarah beside him, clutching her hands in her lap. "Mom," David began, his voice strangely flat, "we need to talk about the house." My brows furrowed. "What about it, dear? Is there a leak? Did the boiler break?" Sarah cleared her throat. "No, Maria, it's about the ownership and your living arrangements." My smile faltered. "My living arrangements? But this is our home." David picked up a stack of papers from the coffee table, a thick packet emblazoned with bank logos. "Mom, Sarah and I decided we need to make some changes. We've refinanced the house. Completely. And, well, your name is no longer on the deed. It's solely in our names now." The words hung in the air, cold and sharp as winter ice. I felt a sudden dizziness, as if the floor beneath me had dropped away. "What do you mean, my name is no longer on the deed?" My voice was barely a whisper. "And what does that have to do with my living arrangements?" Sarah leaned forward, a saccharine smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, Maria, with the refinancing, we've taken out a substantial amount of equity. We need that money for our future, for the children's education, for our own investments. And frankly, with the new mortgage payments, it's just not financially feasible for us to have you living here anymore. We need the space for ourselves, and honestly, the added expenses of an extra person." She trailed off, her gaze dismissive. David looked at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. "Mom, it's time for you to find your own place. We've found a lovely assisted living facility not too far from here. It has excellent reviews, and it's quite affordable. Assisted living. Me, the woman who gave them everything, the woman who still cooked their meals, cleaned their house, and raised their children while they pursued their careers. My mind raced, trying to comprehend the magnitude of their betrayal. My entire life savings, gone, absorbed into their time refinancing. My home, snatched away. My future, reduced to a sterile room in a facility. But my money, I stammered. The down payment, the renovations, that was my retirement. That was for our home. David finally looked up, his face a mask of what I can only describe as irritation. Mom, that money was a gift. You gave it to us. You said it was to help us start our lives. Things change. We have our own lives to live now. You've lived yours, Sarah chimed in. And honestly, Maria, having you here, it's a bit stifling. We need our privacy. The children are getting older. They need their own space. It's just not working out. The casual cruelty of their words, the absolute disregard for my decades of sacrifice, the cold calculation in their eyes, was a punch to the gut. I felt a physical pain, a tearing sensation in my chest. Tears welled, blurring their faces, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of them. Not now. I simply nodded, a silent, trembling nod, and walked out of the living room, up the stairs and into the small bedroom that had been my sanctuary. I closed the door softly, but my world had just crashed down with a deafening roar. I sat on the edge of my bed, the familiar quilt beneath my fingers, and for a long time I just sat there, numb, frozen in a silent scream. But as the initial shock subsided, a slow, burning ember began to glow within me. I thought of my late husband, a man of integrity, who would have been appalled. I thought of my parents, who taught me the value of honesty and hard work. I thought of my grandchildren, innocent pawns in their parents' greed. And then I thought of myself, Maria, the woman who had always given, always sacrificed, always put others first. This was not just about money. It was about respect, about dignity, about the very essence of who I was. And in that moment, sitting in what was no longer my home, something inside me irrevocably shifted. The tears dried. The numbness gave way to a cold, hard resolve. I would not be broken. I would not be cast aside. I would not be a victim. I would fight. I would reclaim what was mine, not just the money, but my peace, my future, and my self-respect. David and Sarah had just made the biggest mistake of their lives, because they had underestimated the quiet woman they thought they could so easily discard. They had awoken a force they never knew existed. The very next morning, I woke before dawn, a clarity of purpose washing over me. No more tears, only action. My first step was deceptively simple, documenting everything. I found an old, sturdy ledger and a new set of pens. With meticulous detail, I began to chronicle every single contribution I had made to that house. I dug out dusty bank statements from my old accounts, highlighting every transfer to David and Sarah for the down payment. I found receipts for the custom kitchen cabinets I insisted on, the new roof I paid for, the landscaping that transformed the backyard. I even itemized the weekly grocery bills, the children's clothes, the school supplies, the extracurricular activity fees, all the added expenses Sarah had so casually dismissed. It was a painstaking process, but each entry, each highlighted transaction, was a small victory, a piece of my truth I was reclaiming. This wasn't just my story. It was a paper trail, undeniable and irrefutable. Next, I needed to locate the crucial documents. I knew I had signed the original purchase agreement. Finding it was a challenge, as most of my important papers were stored in a locked filing cabinet in the basement, a cabinet David and Sarah now controlled. I had to be subtle. Over the next few days, I feigned a need for an old photo album I claimed was in the basement. While David was at work and Sarah was out, I carefully searched, my heart pounding with each rustle of paper. I eventually found it, tucked away behind boxes of old holiday decorations, the original deed, clearly showing my name as a co-owner, and the purchase agreement with all our signatures. I made digital copies, then tucked the originals into a waterproof bag hidden deep within my personal belongings. This was my trump card. The internet became my new best friend. Late at night, After everyone was asleep, I researched property law, family law, elder abuse statutes. I learned about equitable interest, unjust enrichment, and constructive trusts. The more I read, the more I understood the legal complexities, and the more confident I became. This wasn't just a moral failing on their part, it was potentially a legal one. I opened a new, entirely separate bank account at a different institution, transferring what little money I still had. I also set up a post office box for mail, ensuring no one could intercept my communications. Discretion was paramount. My next move was to find the right professionals. I couldn't trust just anyone. I started by searching for lawyers specializing in elder law and property disputes. I scheduled discreet consultations, explaining my situation without revealing my location. The first lawyer was too hesitant, the second too aggressive. The third, a sharp, compassionate woman named Ms. Evans, listened intently, her eyes narrowing as I recounted David and Sarah's actions. "Maria," she said, "what they've done is reprehensible and potentially very illegal. You have a strong case for equitable interest, and depending on how they executed this refinancing, they may have even committed fraud." She outlined a strategy, emphasizing the need for evidence and a meticulous approach. She understood that this wasn't about vengeance, but about justice and reclaiming my future. She also advised setting up a surveillance system, not just for their ongoing behavior, but for my own safety. With her help, I purchased tiny, unobtrusive cameras, placing one in my room and another in the kitchen, carefully angled to capture their interactions and their treatment of me. As I worked tirelessly on my secret counterplan, David and Sarah, completely oblivious, continued to escalate their appalling behavior. It was as if their initial betrayal had emboldened them, giving them free rein to treat me as an unwanted guest, a nuisance. They began to openly discuss plans for my room, talking about converting it into a home gym or a guest suite for Sarah's visiting parents, all within earshot of me. They started to limit my access to the grandchildren, claiming I was interfering with their parenting, despite the children running to me for comfort whenever their parents raised their voices. They rationed food, making subtle comments about tightening the belt, while I saw new gadgets and designer clothes arriving almost weekly for Sarah. One evening, David even suggested I start paying rent for my room, despite having already taken my life savings. "It's only fair, Mom," he'd said, avoiding my gaze. "We have these new mortgage payments after all." The cameras captured it all. Their dismissive tones, their cold eyes, their naked greed. It was painful to watch, but each recording was another brick in the wall of evidence I was building. They were unwittingly digging their own grave, providing me with undeniable proof of their cruelty and entitlement. Ms. Evans also advised me to prepare a new will, ensuring that in the event of my death, none of my assets would ever fall into their hands. I meticulously detailed my wishes, leaving specific items to my grandchildren and establishing a trust for their future education, managed by a neutral third party, completely bypassing David and Sarah. I even included a clause about the disposition of the house, should I regain legal control, explicitly stating that it was to be sold and the proceeds distributed, ensuring they could not benefit from it after my passing. This was not just about surviving, it was about ensuring my legacy, a legacy of fairness and truth, would endure. The day came when Ms. Evans told me we had enough. Enough evidence, enough legal leverage, enough proof of their deceit and my equitable interest. We had even discovered, through public records and some clever digging by a private investigator Ms. Evans recommended, that the refinancing had been done by forging my signature on the updated deed, effectively removing my ownership without my knowledge or consent. This was not just unethical, it was criminal. The realization sent a chill down my spine, confirming the depth of their depravity. The climax arrived on a crisp autumn morning. I had arranged for David and Sarah to meet us at Ms. Evans' office, under the pretense of discussing my, quote, assisted living arrangements. They arrived, smug and self-satisfied, Sarah in a new designer suit, David with an air of mild impatience. They clearly expected a quick meeting, where I would meekly accept their terms. They were utterly unprepared for what awaited them. Ms. Evans greeted them with a polite but firm smile, inviting them to sit. I sat beside her, my posture straight, my face devoid of emotion. "David, Sarah." Ms. Evans began, her voice calm and measured. "We're here today to discuss the property at 123 Maple Street, specifically Maria's legal rights concerning it." Their smiles faltered. David scoffed. "Her rights? She has no rights. She gave us the money. She's a guest in our house now." Sarah nodded vigorously. Ms. Evans picked up a thick file. "On the contrary, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, Maria's name was on the original deed as a co-owner, and she contributed a substantial sum of money, over 80% of the original purchase price, as evidenced by these bank statements and receipts." She laid out the meticulously organized documents on the polished conference table. David's eyes widened. Sarah's jaw tightened. "Furthermore," Ms. Evans continued, "we have evidence, including expert analysis, that Maria's signature on the revised deed transferring full ownership to you was forged. This constitutes fraud, a very serious criminal offense." David stammered, That's a lie. She signed it. She must have forgotten." Sarah's face was pale. "No, she signed it. I saw her," she insisted, her voice rising. I remained silent, watching them squirm. Ms. Evans held up a small device. "We also have numerous recordings from within the house, documenting your dismissive treatment of Maria, your discussions about removing her, and even your attempt to extract rent from her after having already defrauded her of her life savings. These recordings demonstrate a pattern of emotional abuse and financial exploitation." She then calmly informed them that she had filed a civil lawsuit for equitable interest, unjust enrichment, and fraud, seeking not only the return of my financial contributions, but also damages for emotional distress. She also informed them that the forged deed had been reported to the authorities and a criminal investigation was underway. Finally, she handed them a formal eviction notice. They had 30 days to vacate the property. As I was reclaiming full ownership, the color drained from their faces. David slumped in his chair, suddenly looking years older. Sarah, however, exploded. "You can't do this. This is our home. Our children live there. You're ruining us." She turned to me, her eyes blazing with a hatred I had never seen. "How could you, Maria, after everything we've done for you?" I finally spoke, my voice steady and clear, devoid of any emotion. "You did nothing for me, Sarah. You took everything from me. You tried to throw me out of the home I paid for. You defrauded me, your husband's own mother. This isn't about ruining you. It's about reclaiming what is mine and seeking justice for your crimes." Miss Evans calmly interjected, "I'm afraid there's nothing more to discuss. You have 30 days to vacate. Any attempts to obstruct this process will result in further legal action." The fallout was swift and brutal. David and Sarah's world, built on a foundation of greed and deceit, crumbled completely. The civil suit progressed rapidly, fueled by the irrefutable evidence I had gathered. The criminal investigation confirmed the forgery, leading to charges being filed against both of them. The bank, alerted to the fraud, immediately called in the mortgage, demanding full payment. Without my equity, they couldn't possibly cover it. They tried to fight, but with the weight of proof against them, they had no ground to stand on. Within weeks, the house, the very symbol of their ambition in my betrayal, was foreclosed upon. They lost everything. David, unable to cope with the legal pressures and the public humiliation as the story leaked through their social circles, lost his job. Sarah, whose family had always been concerned with appearances, was ostracized by them. Their relationship, already strained by the pressure and the blame they hurled at each other, dissolved completely. I heard through the grapevine that Sarah had left David, unable to forgive him for getting them into such a mess, conveniently forgetting her own active role. They lost their home, their careers, their social standing, and ultimately each other. They tried to appeal to me, sending desperate texts and voicemails, begging for forgiveness, for a second chance. They even tried to use the grandchildren as leverage. But the quiet, sacrificing Maria was gone. I ignored every message. The time for forgiveness had passed the moment they tried to cast me out. The betrayal had cut too deep, leaving scars that would never fully heal. Justice, cold and unwavering, had been served. With the legal battles behind me and the house legally restored to my ownership, I made another decision. The house, once a symbol of family and security, was now tainted by betrayal. I couldn't live there. It held too many painful memories, too much of what they had tried to take from me. I sold it, ensuring that every cent of my original investment, plus the damages awarded by the court, was returned to me. And then I did something truly for myself. I bought a small, beautiful villa nestled on a quiet hillside overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. It was a place I had always dreamed of, a place of peace and tranquility, a world away from the cold, calculating greed I had endured. Now I wake each morning to the scent of salt air and blooming bougainvillea, with the gentle sounds of the waves as my constant companion. I spend my days gardening, reading, taking long walks, and reconnecting with old friends. My grandchildren visit me during their holidays, a neutral third party facilitating our joyful reunions. I have made sure their future is secure, a legacy that will not be touched by their parents' past mistakes. I am at peace. The pain of the betrayal still lingers, a faint echo, but it no longer defines me. Justice for me was not about reveling in their downfall, but about restoring balance to my own life, reclaiming my dignity, and finding my own serenity. It was about proving to myself that even after the deepest cut, one can heal, rebuild, and flourish. My life is mine again, truly mine, and it is more beautiful than I ever imagined. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.